In just 4 days, count them, Americans will sound off at the polls. So what issues are driving you to vote this year? We've been doing this every day, pretty much leading up to the election. And here's what first-time voters told us in today's installment of Why I'm Voting.
In the year 2016, I didn't have a vote, but now that I do have one, I'm going to use it to put morally just leaders in office.
I have so many issues that are important to me, like climate change and LGBTQ rights, and it's so important for us to vote for elected officials that are actually going to push our country in a direction that's more sustainable.
I'll be looking at who's receiving money from corporate PACs and from the fossil fuel industry, who's fighting against the construction of fossil fuel infrastructure.
On November 6th, I'm voting for women's rights because I want all girls and women and all people to have equitable access to education, jobs, and affordable health care.
All right, so we want to hear from you. We got 4 days to go. Post a video. Tell us why you are voting. Use the hashtag WhyIVoteCNN on Instagram.
Well, today, more proof that the economy is strong. I'm Jim Sciutto in Washington.
And I'm Poppy Harlow in New York. Good Friday morning to you. The jobs report beats expectations. The U.S. economy added 250,000 new jobs last month. That is a great number any way you slice it. And the Carville rule of it is the economy stupid is as true now as it was way back in the 90s. So with 4 days to go until the midterms, why isn't the president hammering this message to voters? Yes, he tweeted about it moments ago, but his overarching message is one of fear and immigration. It is stoking fear of immigrants and fear of Democrats, Jim.
And the president doing that as he surges campaign rallies around the country. There are two more set for today. According to a new Washington Post count, that has meant a surge of misleading claims from 5 a day in the beginning of his presidency, already pretty high for a U.S. president, to 30 a day over the last 7 weeks. CNN White House correspondent Abby Phillip joins us now live from the White House. You got a good economic numbers today, and the indication that the president changes his overall message of fear 4 days to the election.
Great economic numbers, Jim. And the question of why isn't the president talking more about it is one that I think a lot of Republicans are asking today. The president has been pushing something completely different over the last few days and has been dedicating virtually all of his public energy, his time, his tweets to pushing this idea that there is a crisis and an invasion at the border. He's even gone so far as to suggest that the U.S. troops that he's sending to the border in a support capacity should greet rocks with guns.
Anybody throwing stones, rocks, like they did to Mexico and the Mexican military, Mexican police, where they badly hurt police and soldiers of Mexico, we will consider that a firearm. Because there's not much difference when you get hit in the face with a rock, which, as you know, it was very violent a few days ago, very, very violent.
So U.S. military officials are permitted to use force in the face of self-defense, but President Trump's suggestion there is one that a lot of former military officials are saying really flies in the face of the rules of engagement for our service members, especially considering that they are being sent to do something completely different, not to interdict people at the border, but to add support, perhaps build fencing, and to aid with the Department of Homeland Security's existing efforts. But President Trump is just trying to refocus the attention in these last few days before the election on immigration, trying to gin up concern and fear among his supporters. And with two rallies today in West Virginia and Indiana, it's likely that we will hear more and more of that. But for Republicans, especially the ones facing competitive races in certain districts, suburban districts, the message of the economy is one that they would much rather be talking about, Jim and Poppy.
Straight up violates the rules of engagement for the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Abby Phillip at the White House.
Thanks, Abby. So joining us now, CNN military analyst, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. You are the perfect voice, General, to have on this. What do you say to the president saying respond to rock throwers, et cetera, if necessary, with gunfire? And what are you hearing from the broader military community on this?
Well, the first part, Poppy, and thanks for having me, is the concept of them responding to rock throwers. Remember, these are support personnel. So the president's word picture showing people that, hey, if anyone throws a rock at the military guys, they're going to shoot back. And, I suggest that they treat it as a rifle. First of all, if they are used properly, these are engineers, Signal Corps soldiers, intelligence soldiers, aircraft crews, so they won't be up against troops coming or up against civilians coming toward the border. And even if they were, according to Pasakamaititis, they should not be asked to conduct law enforcement operations. That's number one. So he's actually building a word picture, assuming to the American people that these troops are going to be on the front lines, and they're not. Secondly, the fact that he did say this does violate the law of land warfare, and it seems to be a trend that the president has executed both in his campaign and since he's been in office. Remember, this is the same president said we should bomb Iraq and take all their oil, a war crime, that we should bomb and kill terrorist families to send a signal, a war crime, suggested that a false story about President Pershing dipping bullets in blood and using them to scare away Muslims, a war crime, are all kind of in line with this war crime that he's suggesting American soldiers do. The law of land warfare says that soldiers can't use disproportional force. It's one of 5 principles of the law of land warfare, and any commander worth his salt wouldn't allow it, and all the soldiers who have been trained in the values and the Geneva Convention and the law of land warfare would not do it.
General Hertling, as I often remind viewers, you commanded U.S. troops in combat in Iraq. You know about the exercise of force, deadly force when necessary. You hit on a great point there that basically the president's creating a fantasy because those forces are support forces. They will not be face-to-face with these migrants, and it would be unlawful for them, as you say, to shoot rock throwers. But I wonder your concern about how the U.S. military is being used here, deployed by the thousands to the border to fit the president's political narrative and fear-mongering claim. Does that damage the U.S. military?
It absolutely does, Jim. And it just reminded me, I didn't answer Poppy's second question, which I'll get to, which is, have I heard from others about this? Yes, I have. From sergeants to captains who are deploying. Actually, one captain I talked to yesterday is already deployed to the southern border with an engineer company, and I was talking to her about that deployment. But also from senior general retired officers who are all very concerned that the president is now pulling in the military as part of this divisiveness strategy. In fact, let me read to you, as long as I have it here. I got a note from a senior general officer, in fact, higher ranking than me yesterday. I won't name him, but he said everything the president is doing is to distract, divide, and generate fear and discount anyone who disagrees with his daily agenda. We've gone from a nation of hopefulness with an instinct to cooperate, the force that you and I were involved in, Mark, to one where we're a nation of fear and an instinct to suppress disagreement. I think that sums it up very succinctly that, other departments within the government have been divided by the president's rhetoric, and now he's pulling in this institution of the military, and it's caused and seeded a great deal of distrust because now people are saying, will military shoot at people coming toward our border? Do they have control of the people? Will it be another Abu Ghraib or My Lai or Kent State? No, it won't be, but the president has seeded those fears, and it's really unfortunate because it's another slam against an institution that provides for the security of the United States.
Okay, Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, such important insight. Thank you for being here with us on it this morning.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Let's talk more about the broader politics of this. Our chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, is back. So, Dana, you importantly last hour reminded us of the Republican autopsy conducted after Mitt Romney lost in 2012, that we have to expand the umbrella. We have to talk to Hispanic voters. We have to do better with them. It is the opposite of what the president has done from the minute that he came down that escalator and announced his candidacy. And it may work for him. It did in 2016. It may work for him in some ways in the midterms here. It may work for him in 2020. But at what cost to the Republican Party as a whole? By saying, treat rocks thrown by migrants as rifles, et cetera. That's just the latest. And if it is going to result in a cost for the party, why are leaders in the Republican Party not more upset about it?
That is such a great question. To be fair, a lot of the leaders in the Republican Party were upset about it throughout the whole 2016 race. Paul Ryan didn't ever appear with candidate Donald Trump. Pretty much for this reason and others, but primarily this, because he didn't think that Donald Trump was leading the Republican Party in the right way for the long-term health and viability of the GOP. Same goes for Mitch McConnell. He was no Donald Trump fan. But things are different now because Donald Trump is president. And I'll just say in the case of Mitch McConnell, it's a marriage of convenience. Mitch McConnell's lifelong political goal has been to stack the courts with conservative judges. And guess what? He's worked hand in glove with the Trump White House in doing just that. Never mind the Supreme Court, but the lower level federal benches. And so, look, they've made a deal, and they're doing what they can, but they are not comfortable about it. And I think that Paul Ryan, now that he is on his way out, sort of picked another fight with the president on this very issue of immigration, specifically the question of birthright citizenship.
Talking about long-term implications of the president's strategy, the Democratic strategist Paul Begala, he noted the following. He said the more explosive element is college-educated women. They are not itinerant voters like a lot of the Democratic base. They are rooted and they always vote. Is there evidence that there is certainly evidence that they are turning away from the Republican Party?
Yes.
But is there evidence that they're turning away long term, or is it more about Donald Trump?
It's a great question. I don't think we can answer that yet, to be honest, because I will just tell you that my experience about this time in 2016, 2 years ago, going to the ultimate battleground for college-educated women, the suburbs of Philadelphia that Paul Begala knows very well. He's done a lot of races in Pennsylvania. And they were turning away from Hillary Clinton, surprisingly, and towards Donald Trump because they were fed up with business as usual, politics as usual. Didn't love Hillary Clinton. I'm obviously, generalizing here, but that is what I found, and it bore out in the polls. And so I think the way to answer that is to see what the alternative is, because in 2016, on a presidential level, ironically, for these women, many of them did not see the benefit in electing the first woman because they didn't like that particular female candidate. And we'll see what happens down the pike. In the short term, when you're talking about the election on Tuesday, we are seeing these women, at least in the polls leading up to the election, turn away from the Trump Republican Party because they are so disgusted with the rhetoric, with the tone, with the tenor. Never mind the fact that the economy is so good. That is why this $6 million ad buy is now in the ether from the Trump campaign, specifically targeting women who are potentially independent, who need to be reminded that the economy is good and that's good for their families. That's not an accident.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get a lot of data on Tuesday, as they say, right? We'll look at the results. Dana Bash, thanks very much, as always.
Thanks, guys.
Still to come, Roger Stone now admitting that he talked to the Trump campaign about the upcoming WikiLeaks disclosures of stolen Clinton emails, that he did so during the 2016 presidential race. Did he have inside information?
Also, the U.S. economy is thriving. 250,000 new American jobs added last month. The head of the President's Economic Council of Advisors, Kevin Hassett, will be our guest. And can't wait for this story. She captured our hearts when she stood awestruck in front of that portrait of Michelle Obama. Well, now this little girl, look at her. On Halloween, she dressed up as the former First Lady. Little Parker Curry will join us ahead.
CNN special live coverage starts Tuesday at 5 on CNN.
Roger Stone, a political operative and longtime ally of President Trump, is now admitting that he talked to the Trump campaign in 2016 about WikiLeaks' plan to release a stockpile of stolen Clinton emails to hurt Clinton's campaign. Stone published an email exchange with Steve Bannon, then the chief executive of the Trump campaign, where Stone said there'd be a load every week going forward. This as the special counsel, Robert Mueller's team, looks into whether Stone had an inside track with WikiLeaks and whether he shared any of that information with then-candidate Trump or Trump's inner circle. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman from California, Eric Swalwell. He is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for taking the time this morning.
Of course. Good morning, Jim.
So when Stone testified before your committee last year. He said, and I'm quoting, he had no advanced knowledge of the source or actual content of the WikiLeaks disclosures. Do you feel that Stone lied to your committee?
I do. And Jim, Democrats on the committee have tried to refer a number of transcripts to Bob Mueller's office. We've asked the Republicans to allow us to vote those out. You know, I've seen reporting have to be sent over from the House Intelligence Committee, and every time we've asked, Devin Nunes and the Republicans have voted against that, and it's for this very reason, testimony just like this, that we're very concerned.
If the Democrats regain the House, will you bring Stone back to testify before the committee?
Well, I think we'll fill in the gaps where they exist in the Russia investigation, which first would be to send the transcripts to Bob Mueller, then show the public the transcripts, and then interview witnesses, but also to test their accounts using the subpoena power. And so I think first what we'd want to do is to test what Roger Stone told us by subpoenaing Twitter, subpoenaing bank records, going after travel logs and communication logs. We ran a take them at their word investigation with a gang that was not worthy of being taken at their word.
Let me ask you this. If it is proven, and we're not there yet, but if it is proven that Roger Stone was in touch with WikiLeaks, which U.S. intelligence views as a middleman used by Russia to get these stolen emails out, if he got advance notice from WikiLeaks about these materials, and if he passed that advance notice on to the Trump campaign, would he or members of the Trump campaign, in your view, be guilty of a crime?
Well, Jim, my view is that we have to protect the American people from outside interference. Bob Mueller is pursuing the crimes. Our job was to tell the American people what our adversaries are trying to do. I think it's offensive to our democracy if you're willing and eager to work with a foreign adversary and be a middleman between that adversary and a presidential campaign. Now, putting my prosecutor hat on, I've retired from that career, but there's potential accomplice liability, there's potential conspiracy liability, but again, we would have to see just, how dirty Roger Stone got in this business. Jim, Roger Stone for decades has called himself a dirty trickster. It's very hard to believe that he shed those dirty tricks for this campaign. Leopard doesn't change its spots, and Roger Stone does not forget dirty tricks. I think those are two rules to live by in politics.
We're 4 days away, of course, as you know. You're up for re-election as well from the midterm elections. Great job numbers again today, continuing a trend under this administration. What is the Democratic Party's? What is your counter message to voters on Tuesday? What will you do for American voters' economic interests that Republicans are not?
Jim, I grew up and represent Dublin, California, and to people there, the economy is not the stock market, it's not the unemployment rate, and it's certainly not the GDP. It's whether people are doing better, saving more, and dreaming bigger for their kids. And right now, when healthcare costs are going up during open enrollment right now, in some states, premium increases as high as 30%, when tax cuts are going to the top 10% in our country while everyone else has to pay for them, that's not seeing people get ahead. That's just allowing you to get by. So Democrats are running a for the people message which will protect health care by putting back in place protections around pre-existing conditions, protect paychecks to make sure tax cuts go to every person on every floor, not just people on the top floor of every building, and to protect our democracy outside, corruption that we see with the Russians and other countries like Saudi Arabia, and inside where we see dirty money and dirty maps polluting our democracy. There's a lot to do, a lot to protect.
Do you feel that that's a message that's getting out because many Democrats, party leadership, Nancy Pelosi included, associated with a simpler message, which is basically we're not Trump, right? I mean, do you think that American voters see a clear alternative with Democrats other than it's not the party of the president?
Yeah, well, I'm on the leadership team of the House Democrats. I sit in a meeting with Nancy Pelosi every week, and we do conference calls as well. And there is no person who is keeping us more disciplined about healthcare. And it's because she hears it and I hear it across the country. That is top of mind for the American people. Their protections have been gutted. Pre-existing conditions are no longer being defended by the administration as being not able to be charged more for having one. And so we got to protect those first. And then I think, Jim, in 2020, that field of candidates will define largely what the economic message is. Right now, we're in a storm. We have to batten down the hatches and protect the American people, and then we can start to rebuild this country after the midterms.
Final question, yes or no, are you running in 2020?
I'm considering it, Jim. I just had a baby last week, so I got through the full
Congratulations,
term.
by the way.
Thank you. Cricket is her name, and we've got midterm coming this week, and I'm going to make decisions about the long term after this coming Tuesday.
All right. Well, we're going to ask you again after Tuesday. Congressman Swalwell, and congratulations to you and your wife.
Thank you, Jim.
Cricket. I love that name. Congrats, Congressman, to you.
Thank
That's
you.
wonderful.
Thanks,
Enjoy this time. All right, so the economy is on a boom, a winning streak, but are there some warning signs ahead? The chairman of the President's Council on Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett, is with us next.
We've saved our money, and now we get to spend it.
See if I can get you on the record confirming something that Bloomberg is reporting this morning. Bloomberg's reporting that President Trump has officially asked officials to begin drafting a potential trade deal with China ahead of his meeting with President Xi at the G20. Can you confirm that?
You know, I can't confirm or deny stuff that is this, subject to executive privilege. I'm an advisor to the president, and, the things that we do, that stays internal. The thing I can say is that the president had a very positive discussion on the phone with President Xi, that they're looking forward to having a productive meeting, down at the G20. And if the president were going to go have a meeting with, any head of state, if they're going to talk about tiddlywinks, then, the staff would be preparing the president to talk about tiddlywinks, right? And so I don't think that there's necessarily, but I don't have anything to add to that.
I hear what you're saying there. Let's get to some of the long-term issues here, Kevin, and some concerns that a slowdown is coming. So if you take through some of the numbers, new monthly home sales have fallen 22% since a year ago. Residential investment has declined for the last 3 quarters. Auto sales are down. In the third quarter, business investment dropped dramatically from 8.7% to just 0.8%. Is this evidence of a fading impact on the economy in a beneficial way from the tax cuts and a slowdown in 2019?
No, I really don't think so. I think that let's go through the 3 components that you mentioned. So the residential sector, that is the sector that's been pretty weak for a while, and you're right to point to its continued weakness. Motor vehicles were down, and I think that that's probably because that's a pretty interest-sensitive sector, but we're also at like model year change time, and often interest rates plus model year change can cause autos to go on hold for a while. But the capital spending numbers, don't forget that if something goes up a lot and then it goes up a little, then it's higher, right? And so the capital spending numbers are way up from where they were at the beginning of the year, and all of the data we have is way more positive about capital spending than what you saw in the GDP release. So I look forward to seeing the revision of that. The non-defense capital goods orders and shipments, the key source data for that, they were up more than 6% in the quarter.
I hear you.
Can I say one last thing? That even today, because I was really looking at this because I'm puzzled by the GDP data, in the jobs report today, we could actually look at job creation in the industries that make capital goods, and now we have like the best data in the current quarter for that industry, and it was up something like 5.2%. So there's 5% growth in employment in capital goods making industries, and so therefore the capital spending boom continues, and GDP does too.
But there is concern about the impact of tariffs. You have the National Association of Business Economics survey. 38% of goods producing companies said they've delayed investment because of the trade war. Wall Street Journal polled economists. They say growth is going to slow to 2.5% next year. A lot of it because of the tariffs, right? And this is in the hopes that a deal can get done with China. When you look at that, do you have concerns that if growth slows in that way, right? Or the IMF says that growth is going to slow to 1.8% by 2021. That's what the Fed is saying. Are you worried about how you pay for the tax cuts if we see that slowing?
Well, first, that was a multi-part question, so let me go that on trade, we've made an enormous amount of progress basically with everybody but China, and it's because President Trump is, Peter Navarro says he works in Trump time, and it's kind of true that he moves fast, he makes deals fast, and we've got the USMCA deal, we've got free trade talks with Europe and free trade talks with Japan, and so all of that stuff is moving in a direction that's very positive for growth, but you're correct to point to China as being the one thing that doesn't seem to be making as much positive movement. But the fact that the president has talked to President Xi, and the fact that they're meeting, makes us hopeful that that story is going to end up having the happy end that all the other stories have had.
But are you worried, Kevin, if there is not a happy ending with China and these tariffs continue to weigh on growth, you're not going to be able to pay for the tax cut?
No, I don't think that the effect of us on of that not resolving the same way the USMCA did would be anything close to the effect on them. And it's, because basically what happens is that if we put a tariff on a Chinese good, then, our customers can just buy it from Malaysia or from the US or from someplace else. And so what you really have to do to find the economic damage is find the stuff that doesn't have a close substitute. And most of the things that we buy from China are kind of like generic manufactured goods that you can buy from somebody else if the Chinese don't make a deal with us. So that's why, you guys have covered on the show. I'm sure that if you look at Chinese markets, you look at the Chinese economy, then this trade dispute has had a much bigger negative effect on them than on us, because we could just go to alternative suppliers.
Let me finally ask you about immigration, because the president is hammering on immigration 4 days ahead of the midterms. This is what you wrote in the National Review, quote, if the U.S. doubled its total immigration and prioritized bringing in new workers, it could add more than half a percentage point a year to expected GDP growth. Would increased immigration in this country actually help with growth and help pay for the tax cut?
Right. And that was something I wrote a long time ago when I was at the American Enterprise Institute, not as an administration official.
It?
Oh, no. Yeah, of course. So the point is that the president has emphasized that if we have skills-based immigration rather than chain migration, then we could bring a lot more skilled workers into our country and go, as you know, we have more job vacancies than we have available workers. We could bring people in to fill those in places that we need to. That would definitely be a positive for the economy. And for sure, if asked to analyze that's what I would say still.
And just on that point, do you wish he was out there on the economy 4 days ahead of the midterms talking about that instead of talking about invaders from a migrant caravan?
I'm not a political advisor. I'm an economist, and the fact is that the economy is about as strong as I've seen in my career. I mean, the notion that we've got the highest wage growth in more than a decade, that we've got people rushing back in to the labor market, those 1.3 million people that had sort of given up, that we've given new hope to, I think that's really a positive story. And I think that that's a positive story that has legs, because I think it's going to continue. It's a last thought about it, which is that if there's anyone listening and you're one of those people that sort of gave up because you kept applying for jobs and they weren't giving you a job, you should get back in there. There's so many job openings that it's time to reconnect.
Good advice. Let's see if we hear more of it on the campaign trail in the next 4 days. Kevin, we appreciate the time as always. Have a good weekend.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right, Jim.
There are calls for a ceasefire 3 years after the start of the brutal civil war in Yemen, but beyond the fighting, new attention on the human toll of the crisis. Millions desperate simply for food, and it may be getting worse.
After transforming to meet the challenge.
Her name means hope in Arabic, but this morning we have a sad update to share with you. A 7-year-old Yemeni girl who has become a striking symbol of the dire situation in her war-torn country. You see her there. She's died. Amal Hussein's mother says her daughter starved to death at a refugee camp just 4 miles from a hospital, but she simply didn't have the money to take her there. This haunting image of the starving girl in the New York Times last week drew international attention. Poppy, it reminds me of those images of Ethiopia in the 80s.
It does. It does, and it reminds me of Aylan Kurdi, the little, the little boy that was the image of the crisis as well in Syria. It's tragic. This is an image you have to keep looking at. It's uncomfortable, but this is the reality. A week after the image was published, U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called on all sides to ceasefire in Yemen's civil war. But Amal's story, this little girl you see right here, is just one example of the crisis. The 3-year conflict has killed at least 10,000 people. The UN says 13 million Yemenis are in danger of starvation. With us now, our senior international correspondent, Nema Al-Bagher, who has reported extensively on this crisis. Also joining us on the phone is Declan Walsh, the Cairo bureau chief for the New York Times. He has been the one in touch with Amal Hussein's mother, who just lost her daughter. Declan, Nema, thank you for being here. And Declan, to you first. You're the one who brought the world the news that she had died. What do you want everyone to know as they look at this image of this little girl?
Well, as you said, this is just another shocking example. The plight of Amal really represents the plight of so many young children in Yemen. There are 1.8 million children who are considered to be acutely malnourished in Yemen. About 1/5 of those, 400,000, are considered to be severely malnourished, in a similar state to Amal, the girl we met in a hospital ward a couple of weeks ago. And the UN says the situation is getting rapidly worse. They fear that if the fighting continues as it is now, and if Yemen's economic crisis continues to deepen as it has over the last couple of months, there could soon be as many as 500,000 children in a similar state to Amal.
Nima, you spent so much time covering this war. The U.S. backed Saudi Arabia. Many of the weapons, as you've established in your reporting, have been used and sometimes in strikes that have killed civilians there. Do the people of Yemen view this not just as a Saudi war or Yemeni war, but an American war? Do they hold the U.S. responsible for
Absolutely,
this?
absolutely. When you speak to people, they really describe these almost concentric circles of moral complicity, because this isn't a natural disaster. This is an entirely man-made disaster. There has been a partial blockade on the port in Hodeidah. There's a stranglehold as the Saudi-led coalition's forces try to retake that port. And there have been very cynical decisions made around that. There has been targeted attacks on grain silos, on markets, on fishing boats. And I know Declan spoke about those 5,000 children that are at risk of also dying from starvation, but we need to take that a step further out. There are 22.2 million people in Yemen in need of humanitarian assistance. That's 80% of the country. So we're at a point now where potentially, if we tip over the edge, even going in with the UN, even if people start trying to buy their consciences and funding the UN food program extensively, you will still not be able to stop people from dying. And we saw, as Poppy mentioned, their Secretary Mattis coming out and asking for a ceasefire. It needs to go one step further. There needs to be leverage put behind that ceasefire. There needs to be consequences.
Let's put that picture of her back up on the screen. Declan, to you, final word. Mohammed bin Salman, King Salman, what could they do right now so that more little girls and little boys like this don't die?
There are two things they could do. They could stop the fighting, and as you say, there's been a call for a ceasefire within the next 30 days. Mohammed bin Salman and his Western backers, countries like the United States and Britain, could stop the fighting. And secondly, there are a number of important economic measures that have to be taken urgently to stop the country's economic collapse, to stop the currency plunging. Those aid workers have told us that those are the factors that have put food, the most basic food items, beyond the reach of millions of people. So it's a combination of both international relief aid, but also measures to make sure that so many other people can just afford to buy the basics that will keep them alive.
Yeah. Well, U.S. officials now raising the possibility that the Khashoggi murder could be give the U.S. the leverage to end this war. We show